Good evening. Greetings from the Institute of Global Professional IGP. Greetings from the Institute of Global Professional IGP. Thank you all for joining us and staying with us to the end. Honorable Knowledge Seeker, today I am your host for the evening. My name is Bagundash. I am from Bangladesh. Dear Knowledge Seeker, I am proud to be associated with IGP. IGP is a social and certified international training institute. In last years, we already served 35,000 million plus knowledge seeker from 100 plus countries. IGP is internationally recognized and globally accredited. We are connected to more than 450 plus profession and 4,500 plus organization. In Institute of Global Professional, IGP is a training faculty for skill development, which was founded in 2020 and is generating competent candidate to meet demand in the global labor market by providing professional qualification. The Institute of Global Professional is an education institute that provides social work globally recognized and reportable. We serve student and community resource providing holistic social work and education. We believe that it's not effective to increase one skill just by acquiring formal education. So we provide effective training and consultation to general profession generation all over the world. We distribute our services local, national, international to student, job seeker, job holder, and also for learners with respective campus location and distance learning platform. We are an occupational and dependable institute. IGP is one of the famous online institutes from all over the world. Our vision is education is not a business product, it's a part of our human rights. Based on our vision, we are trying to reach all corners of the world for free webinars, seminar courses, our two-stop mentoring and counseling, etc. On the other side, we are also trying to offer more than 100 premium services for free, like create own portfolio website, resume builder, cover letter, motivation letter, and one knowledge platform for gathering general knowledge which can update all day. Kids learning game, website, converse, site, free courses, and many more. We help prepare you to learn to meet their expectation and dream and become highly skilled people. We implement several training program webinar and offline online courses for youth and learner by professional trainers, speakers, and coaches. Our sessions are conducted by globally renowned professionals to develop all kinds of youth and to promote the education of their abilities and personalities. Spreading knowledge is crucial for the Institute of Global Professionals. We believe that knowledge is love and light and vision. So we try to understand the needs of today's generation and serve them with good research and practice methods. We must have a genuine concern for the learner we represent. More diversity, growth, and innovation are required to lead a session with professionalism, passion, and integrity. IGP members are committed to offering effective best quality service and continual improvement so that individuals who seek information can improve their skill level and value. Before we move to the next, let me remind don't forget to share, tag, and mention your friend in the comment box. Your support is very valuable for us. Thank you. Moving to the next, with your continuous support, we already completed 1,430 webinars successfully. Wow. Before we move to the next, let me remind don't forget to share, tag, and mention your friend in the comment box. Your support is very valuable for us. Thank you. Moving to the next, with your continuous support, we already completed 1,430 webinars successfully. Wow. Dear IGP speaker, participants, and well-wishers, at this moment, this is a very important message for all of you. We change and design our website www.eduigp.com. On this website, we have surprise for everyone. Hope you will be benefited. We already launched our new website where you can find all our previous activities together with lots of new features. But one strong point is that without an account or logged in, you cannot enjoy our services. So create your account one with proper information. Note that with proper information, you will enjoy all features. With mismatched data, you cannot do anything here. From now on, you have to participate in live quiz competition on our website. We replace Slido. You have to join directly on our website. Now you can check all our previous webinar with verified e-certificate. Now it's easier and time oriented because after the session we will not give you any code for certification. You have to take part in one exam. After if you pass, you will receive your certificate, otherwise not. But you can take in an exam unlimited till you passed. If you are an IGP speaker, you can download your all previous certificate, speakership certificate. If you are a host of IGP, you can download your certificate updated. If you are an online quiz competition winner, you can download your certificate of participation. If you are selected for a lifetime membership, then you can download a certificate of lifetime membership easily. Besides this, if you participate in any award function which organize combined support by IGP, you can download that also. You can instantly prepare and download 18 type of instant certificates from our website within a minute. Certificate of Global Professional Membership, Certificate of Global Influencer during the pandemic, Certificate of Active Knowledge Seeker, Certificate of Social Activities during the pandemic, Certificate of Achievement IGP Knowledge Seeker Campaign 2020, Certificate of Achievement IGP Knowledge Seeker Campaign 2021, Certificate of Achievement IGP Knowledge Seeker Campaign 2022, Certificate of Participation Webinar Series 1, Authentic Assessment in Teaching Learning, Certificate of Participation Webinar Series 2, Teaching English as a Foreign Language and Assessment, Certificate of Participation Webinar Series 3, Digital Classroom Engagement Tool, Certificate of Participation Webinar Series 4, The New Trend in Education, Certificate of Participation Webinar Series 5, Upskill Organizational Leadership and Managerial Skills, Certificate of Participation Webinar Series 6, Trends and Innovation in Mathematics Education, Certificate of Participation Webinar Series 7, Research and Comprehension Approach, Certificate of Participation Webinar Series 8, Art in Teaching Special Program in the Arts, Certificate of Participation Webinar Series 9, 21st Century Tool in Teaching Mathematics, Certificate of IGP Corporate Ambassador, Certificate of Campus Ambassador, which you can download and within a minute. Now you can participate in 1,000 plus international level quiz with verified e-certificate. Teaching tips for teacher, health tips for parents, health tips for team, gamification tools for teacher. You can join IGP alumni. You can check out our 50 plus premium services website for free and many more. Dear IGP one question we promised previously, but lack of technical issue, we are late sending you on time. This is a great opportunity to collect your previous credential. We already solve all the issues from our website. Now you can enroll, reset password, everything. You check your dashboard for all webinar details. It is a crucial request to you. Check all button and page on our website. Surely I can say you will be benefited. Thank you, but note that without an account or logged in, you cannot enjoy our services. At present, we are going to start our 1431 program, which name is Language Planning and Policy Formulation in a Bilingual Context. And today our speaker name is Roma Shen Buanaventura Avin. She is from Philippines. Before I hand over the stage to our speaker, ma'am wants to share a little bit about her. Assistant Professor 1, University of Nueva Precis Naga City, Camera Suit. Now, very important moment for me to invite our speaker to IGP with her presentation. Now, very important moment for me to invite our speaker to IGP with her presentation. Hello, ma'am.
Yeah.
Good evening.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Ma'am, the stage is you. You can start your presentation now.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. So, again, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the IGP participants for this evening's webinar, which is entitled as Language Planning and Policy Formulation in a Bilingual Context. So, before I proceed with my slides, presentation, or my slide deck, my topic is just limited to language planning and policy and only to bilingual context. So it's about bilingualism only. So let me now have my next slide. And these are the topics that we can expect in today's session. So first, we will be talking about language planning, then we have language policy, and of course, we have bilingual context. And in relation to all of this, we will be talking about how to plan, what are the stages into planning, um, or planning or conceptualizing your language policy. And then, of course, we will be talking about the theories that are connected to my topic. So, as part of the introduction, it is, of course, important to get to know the pioneer or the language theorists, the language scholars who started the idea of what we call language planning and policy. And language planning is indeed important, not only during their times, but most especially right now. So, right now, we are said to be in a global concept. We are now dealing globally with other people, just like this one. This is an example of what I'm talking about. So it's so easy for us to really communicate with other people from around the globe. It's so easy for us to learn. So knowledge is really accessible. And with this, with the rampant change that we are experiencing right now, of course, the kind of language that we use and as means of our communication is also affected by the globalization that we are facing. So it is really a must for us to really understand the value of planning a language policy that we should come up not only for the academe but of course even in our own respective country. So first that we will be talking about is none other than Uriel Weinreich. So he is one of the pioneer when it comes to language planning and policy, or we also call this LPP. Okay. Um, he first invoked the term language planning in the early 1950s in New York. So that's the year when the concept of planning the language policy was first coined by a scholar, by a language scholar. So what did he do during the start of language planning concept? He worked on the context of immigrant languages and dialects. Of course, even as of now, we also have a lot of immigrants, especially now that we are borderless when it comes to education, to knowledge. So of course, the number of immigrants are really coming up. And with that, he tried to connect the immigrant languages to the native language, or we call this dialects in a particular area in New York. And with all of this, he discussed about bilingual communication, which includes the mixing of a fading language with a replacing second language. And I think all of us we have second language. So I am from the Philippines, and English is our second language. Our first language is our mother tongue, or our first language is Filipino. And aside from that, we also have a lot of dialects in our country. So it is also applicable not only in my country but across the globe. So we are also experiencing mixture of languages because of immigration and other factors. So he links anthropology and theoretical linguistics, which sharpened the observation that he had of ties between social phenomena and aspects of language and communication. What Weinreich um, um, what Winrich tried to tell us in his study is that in communication, anthropology is also important. So it is a must for us to really connect or find linkages between our social phenomena and our language communication. So the society itself and everything, just like the setting of immigrant and of course the dialect. And he noted he noted that speakers in bilingual communities do not keep their languages and dialects separate, but instead they produce what we call hybrid interlanguage. So meaning to say, there is no chance of anyone to forget or not to use a particular dialect and then try to adapt completely the second language, but rather they do interlanguage. So they can use both of the languages. And of course, according to him, either language as a composite single proficiency that blends features of the available communication forms. So with all of this interlanguage, we can be able or we were able to really communicate well or properly. Another person that we should talk about when it comes to LPP or language planning and policy is none other than Ilnor Hagen. So in his case, um, he expanded the meaning of the term language planning, and he studied on influential account of the Norwegian policy to eradicate the influence of Danish on Norwegian. So this is a different story when it comes to the Danish and the Norwegian, but it was just mentioned because our topic is about language planning and policy. So in this case, he pinpoint or he used that particular situation as the the center or the focus of his study. Then we also have um, Haynes clause. So Haynes clause, he consolidated the term language planning with the addition of the term status planning. So what is status planning? According to him, when we talk about status planning, this is how societies allocate roles and functions. So for example, we have medium of instruction and official language. So to languages through laws and regulations. So it's not just merely about coming up with a policy when it comes to language, but we should also put into consideration our existing law in our country, right? Because it will always be a legal basis in crafting up of any language policy. Okay? And then in connection to this, the same person, clause, his focus is directed away from social phenomena towards the internal features of languages. So, reflecting also the internal standpoint of linguists at the expense of the practices and procedures of communication. So, it's not just purely outside when it comes to language planning, but you should also try to reflect inwardly. You should also put into consideration the procedures of communication that are really existing in your country or in your institution and being practiced, especially in school. So these are important things to consider when it comes to language planning and policy. And also, when we talk about language planning and policy, it is the combined ideas of Hogan and Claus, which remain important for many professional language planners today. So, although they existed in the early times in the year 1950s, still their theories, their concepts when it comes to language planning are still being practiced as of today. Now, talking about essence, if we're going to get the essence of their theories, of their linguist belief when it comes to LPP, this is a typology for classifying the choices government authorities make regarding language and social life. So it's we cannot talk about language and social life as social life. They're always interconnected to each other, and they're always there's always role coming from the government itself. And talking about it classically, those choices involve identification of a language or communication problem. Then we have the formulation of alternative ways of resolving the problem. And then, of course, deciding the norm to be promoted and implementing it via education system. So classically, this is how it is being done. So first, according to this, we need to involve identification of a language or problem. So what's the existing problem in our institution when it comes to bilingualism? So after identifying the problem, we need to find the best practices or strategies for us to be able to resolve the problem. And take note that communication is really an important thing that we should consider, especially nowadays that information is really accessible to all. And after finding our own practices or strategies to solve the problem, we should now decide of a particular norm that we should promote in our environment, in our institution. And of course, after doing these things, we should now start to implement the policy. And the best tool for us to implement the policy is, of course, through education. So this is where the roles of school will come in. Okay, so it is really important. So we have the government, the society, the language scholars, and of course language, and of course the academy or the schools. So a language problem leads to a language policy, which leads to LP or language planning. So this is where language planning um, comes in or originated. So there is an existing problem. The problem leads to a policy, and of course, this is now what we call LPP or language planning and policy. So we now have the next slide. So we will now talk about language frameworks and models. So when we reach the point of millennium, right? The millennium brought a lot of interest when it comes to the field of language policy and planning or LPP. And why is this so? Because when we started to communicate with other races around the globe, that's the point that we happened to adapt to a particular language. We all have our second languages and so on. So there is really now a need for language policy, and it will always require a lot of planning. So the imperious spread of English, because English is, I think it's the global language nowadays. So most of the countries, their second language is considered as English. So when it comes to the spread of English language, and other global languages, there is now the alarming loss and endangerment of indigenous and small language communities worldwide. So this is now the problem. Because of the growth of this English language and because of its use globally, the tendency is that we are not using our dialects, our own language. So it is important now for us not to neglect our first language, because we know that language also stands our culture. So it is our own identity. Language will always be associated with our own identity, our culture. And this is what makes us so unique from other races in the world. And with the coming now of what we call global language, it is not that, it's not a very good reason for us to forget or to neglect our own language. And here is now the importance of bilingualism. So it's the use of our first language together with the second language, learning both languages for us to be very for us to become an effective communicator. And that's the importance of having or doing language planning, and of course crafting out a language policy. So that's the importance of that. It's not a reason for us to neglect, and then it's also not a good um, thoughts to think that one language is more powerful than one language. It's not, because all languages are powerful in its own respective tool, function, and purpose to one country or to a race. Um, Next slide. Let's have this one. So, language teaching and language revitalization initiatives constitute the pressing real world, or what we call language planning and policy. And when it comes to this, we also have critical and postmodern theoretical developments in the social sciences have found their way into LPP research, infusing new perspectives and of course emphasis. So because of the the effect of learning global language and other second languages that we have, a lot of research has been conducted to look into the importance of LPP or language planning, not only for communication subjects, but also in other area of specializations. So when it comes to language planning and policy frameworks, the first person that we will always have is Cooper in the year 1989. Actually, the main the main proponent when it comes to LPP frameworks and models are Cooper and Tollef Son in the year 1991, and later we will be talking about them. So the year 1990s saw a lively output of LPP books. So there are a lot of published LPP books and review articles proposing a new theoretical directions, because if this started way back 1950s, it will not be applicable in the year 1990s and even as of today. Whatever theories that we have in the past, it is now subject also for revisitation and trying to make it um, appropriate in the current time that we have, especially in communication. So the main question or the main thought of Cooper when it comes to LPP is this. According to him, what actors attempt to influence what behaviors or of which people for what ends, under what conditions, by what means, through what decision making process, with what effect. If you're going to observe the question or the thoughts, there are a lot of important words there mentioned. First, we have actors. So it's us, the user of the language, and then how will it influence our behaviors, and then up until what limitation do we need to use the language that we have, or the language that we are about to adapt, and then under what condition we will be utilizing the language, and by what means as well, and then how can it affect our decision making process, especially when it comes to formulating now the language planning or the language policy, I mean, and then what will be the effect of the policy to the people. Okay. And still, according to Cooper, he clearly enunciated in his theory that there is a need of social change in order to move LPP forward. If we want to make our language planning and policy more effective, more appropriate, we should really have social change. We should consider social change. That's according to Cooper. That's his belief. And then here comes Tollef's son. Tollef's son is a little different from Cooper. He sought to contribute to a theory of language planning that locates the field within social theory. So he tried to connect um, everything to social theory. And then next to Tolliff son, we also have Fetes, another well-known name when it comes to LPP frameworks and model. So he also presented his own model and framework. So in the year 1997, um, Fetes envisions the link between language planning and language policy. These two terms are really different. But for us to be able to come up with a language policy, it requires a lot of language planning. And then, when we talk about language planning, according to Fettes, it must be linked to the critical evaluation of language policy. There is always an existing language policy. So, as of now, if we will be searching our own language policy, there is an existing language policy. So, the former or the existing language policy provides us of the standards of rationality and effectiveness. And then the latter, this is now the process of testing the ideas against actual practice in order to promote the development of better language planning models. So, such a field would be better described as language policy and planning. So, this is where it started, the LPP, or the language planning and policy frameworks. So, when it comes to language frameworks and models, language planning efforts typically include several stages. So we have major two stages when it comes to language frameworks and models. So the first stage is needs analysis. So what happens in needs analysis? This is the first stage. When it comes to needs analysis, we need to remember that this stage involves um, social political analysis of communication patterns within the society. So we need to analyze the social, or we need to come up with a social political analysis of our own communication. How do we communicate? How do people communicate in your society, in your country? And after the first stage, which is needs analysis, or we need really to determine what's the need of our own country, or particularly in our school, what do we need? So the next stage after the needs analysis is, of course, the language planning process that involves the selection of a language or language variety for planning purposes. So that's the second stage when it comes to language frameworks and models. Then we also have the two types of language planning. So we will go back to clause. So during the first part of my talk, those are just merely introduction about the people who pioneered the idea of LPP. And as we proceed with our discussion, we will try to really get to know them well and get to know their theories, their beliefs when it comes to LPP, especially in communication. So Heinz Claus presented two types of language planning. So we have corpus planning and we have status planning. So what's the difference between the two? When we talk about corpus planning, it is the internal structure of the language. So when it comes to the internal structure of the language, the activities that must be included there are writing system for a spoken language, and then initiating the spelling reforms, creating new terms, and publishing grammar books. That's for the corpus planning. And we also have the status planning. When we talk about status planning, the efforts, or this, I mean, it refers to all the efforts undertaken to change the use and function of a language or language variety within a given society. So we are now dealing with its use, its functions. So if we will be talking about use and functions, we will always discover that even up until today, there's a particular language or there's a particular phrase, although using the same language, but the function, the way we use that, it's different as compared in our country and yours. So we should always look for status planning. We should always do status planning. To we need to know the function, the use, and how did it change for several years now, right? So also another is ANR, Hagen's view. So according to him, language planning is a technocratic process concerned with systematizing and cultivating a standardized language code to solve problems. So according to him, there must be a system, or it should be systematic and should be standardized to all. And the purpose, of course, is to find solution to a problem. So, according to him, he emphasized on the importance of the written standard over the spoken. So that's his view. For him, he thinks that written communication, written text is more important over spoken, and this is true. So, um, in our practice today, of course, we can take note that if things are done verbally or spoken, it doesn't have the legality, or it doesn't really have its sense. So everything must be put into writing. So, and this is really correct. The written text or written communication is more valuable as compared to the spoken one. And another thing that Huggins presented is that dialects, or the regional or social, will always or can always hamper communication, and we should not forget this. And last but not the least, according to his view, concerned with equality among standard languages, non-standard languages are problematic. Okay, so it's not always it's not always a proper way to look for equality, because when it comes to standardized language, because when we talk about standardized and non-standard languages, we will always find it so difficult to have the equality, because they will always have their own purpose, and then they are both important to all of us. And when it comes to this, we also have neoclassical approach versus historical approach. And what's the meaning of this? First, we need to understand that neoclassical approach is presented by Hagen, while the historical approach is presented by Tollefson in the year 1991. So when it comes to neoclassical, according to them, when it comes to LPP, there's always an individual choice, right? And then current language situation is important for neoclassical approach. And then there's always there must be an evaluation of historical and moral terms that we are about to use. And of course, the model assumes that the field of applied linguistics and teachers are apolitical. So you should I mean the linguistic and then the teacher who will be handling the or who will be facilitating the learning of the students, especially when it comes to language, they should not they should not consider the influence of other things such as politics and everything. So they should be apolitical. And going now to historical approach by Tollefson, this is also the view. According to historical approach, historical structural influence of socio-historical factors on language use. There is a thought, according to him, that the historical structure can really influence our own language. So, meaning to say, we should take into consideration the historical structural influence as well as the socio-historical factors for us to be able to come up with a good language planning and policy. Another is that we need to consider our past relationship or the past relationship between groups. And then we should be concerned with issues of class dominance and oppression. So it will always affect the language. So if you are the oppressed, of course, you also have your own way of uttering words or communicating your message, and we should put that into consideration in crafting our LPP. And political stance is inescapable for those who avoid political questions, advertently support the status quo. So this is more on historical approach. Then we also have what we call autonomous versus ideological, presented by Street in the year 1984. When it comes to autonomous, it is believed that Literacy is a neutral technology which can be detached from social context. That's the belief when it comes to autonomous, that literacy is different. It's neutral, right? And then according to this presentation, literacy can also be isolated as an independent variable. So meaning to say, it doesn't matter what other factors are around you. Literacy can always stand for itself. It's neutral. So it's like independent. Okay? And then sets up a dichotomy between written and oral modes of communication. Then, excuse me for a while, we also have ideological. So what's the meaning, or what's the view of ideological according to Street? When it comes to ideological, it concentrates on the social practices of reading and writing and recognizes, of course, the practices are culturally embedded. So they're part of our culture. The way we write is always, we will always speak about our culture, our identity. So literacy, according to ideological perspective, is a socially constructed practice. It's not neutral as compared to autonomous. So it is developed socially. And then it will always have different meaning for different groups. So meaning to say, the way we perceive literacy will always be different the way other people perceived it. And we should also consider the overlap of the oral and literate modes that we have. Then we also have the Huggins framework, or four phases of language planning. So these are the four phases that we should do when it comes to language planning. So selection, codification, implementation, elaboration, and or modernization. So what are these? And we will deal with this one. First, we will have the first two, which are selection and codification. So these stages are sometimes referred to as status planning. So if you are in selection, it means to say that you are in your status planning. So meaning to say, what happens when you are in the first phase of language planning is that um, you are now trying to, or you are about to choose a language variety to fulfill certain functions in a given society. You will now decide what is the more functional language in your own country or in your own institution. Like for me, in my case, the most functional language that we have is of course English. So all of the things that we have here in our country, this is the language of business, the language of our law. It is also the medium of instruction. I mean, this is also the language that we use as medium of instructions in our schools. So this is really functional for us here in our country. And after, in the first stage or the first phase, which is selection, you now have the codification. So after selecting the most functional language that you would want to have or to implement in your LPP, you will now have the codification. So this is the second phase. And when we talk about codification, this is now the phase of creating a linguistic standards. You will now come up with criteria. What are the standards now? What will be your criteria? What will be the norm that you will be selecting? So just like what I mentioned a while ago, you need to think about the norm. And then, of course, codification is divided into three stages, right? So we have graphization, grammatication, lexicalization. So these are the three stages when it comes to codification. So what we mean by graphization? When we talk about graphization, we need to develop a writing system. So in our language, in our LPP, we need now to determine what will be the writing system. And of course, we have the grammatication. What will be now the rules or the norms of your grammar? So just like in English, we all know the rules. We have the SVA, we have the subject and verb agreement, we have a lot of rules when it comes to its use. So that's what we call grammatication. Then, last but not the least, the third stage of codification is lexicalization, meaning to say, we need also to identify the vocabulary. And vocabulary is really important. We need to remember that according to one research that I've read, a first year college student must already have um, 10,000 vocabulary. So if you will be crafting a policy, you should also have a wide range of vocabulary with the language that you choose. So if you choose English, then you should have a wider vocabulary of the language. And then you know the grammar so that you can set up or you can develop a writing system that you can implement. Then we have the third phase of language planning. So we have the implementation. So implementation was said to be the act of promoting the decisions made in the stages of selection and codification. So we will now implement whatever it is that you did during the selection and codification. So, how to implement this? Of course, you can include marketing strategy. You can produce books, publish books. You can publish or create pamphlets, newspapers, and textbook using the new codified standard. Okay? So when we need to understand that these are the things that we can do when it comes to implementation. And we also have elaboration or modernization. When we talk about elaboration or modernization, it refers to the terminology and stylistic development of a codified language to meet, of course, the demand of communication that is appropriate to our modern life and technology. So if we plan out a policy, a language policy, we should make it or we should tailor fit it to our current situation. So we are now in the era of technology. So of course, we should make our language policy suitable to the current time that we are into. So its main area is the production and dissemination of new terms. So those are the main area when it comes to elaboration. So we will now produce and we will now disseminate. Okay? So we need to take note that when we talk about elaboration, it is an ever evolving process. It is not a thought that we should think that reaching the fourth phase is enough. All right? It will always evolve. All things that we have planned, policies that we have created when it comes to language, we need always to expect that it will change. Maybe 5 years from now, 10 years from now. It will always be subject to its evolving process. So we also have the three stages of lexical modernization as mentioned earlier. So we have borrowing, so we can borrow. Um, then we can also have after borrowing, we need now to extend the meaning of a native term, and then we now create new term. When we create new term, it means neologisms. That's it. So what are the examples? We have PDF right now. It's very common when it comes to the race of technology. We now have PDF, and the meaning, of course, is portable document file. So we borrow words and then we extend the native term, and then we now have a new term with a new meaning. That's an example. So we also have like trash can or or fire. Okay. Then we also have power cable. So we have electricity's rope. So those are examples of the stages of lexical modernization. So meaning to say, um, the more that we are into change when it comes to our community, to our era, to our phase, and then of course with all the things that we are learning, our language will also um, adapt. It will also change. So as communicators, and then we should also equip ourselves with the latest trend, particularly in communication right now. We should understand the new terms that are coined. We should pay attention to the young generation. What kind of language do they have? Because when you come up into LPP, we should also consider these things that we can get from our young generation, because they are our future, and they are, I mean, they must be equipped more with a deeper sense of understanding, so that they can really become an asset to our community, and they can really become an effective communicator. Then we have also the stages of language planning. So, what are the stages involved? First is what we call standardization. So, when we talk about standardization, it is a unified variety of the language that is established if ever it's necessary. So, there should be a unification of all variety. And next, we have elaboration. Okay? But when it comes to standardization, we need to take note that we should learn how to fine tune the selected language or language variety that we have, or we also consider that, or call that as corpus planning. Okay, and under standardization, we have elaboration. So elaboration, it means to say that any of a variety of developments, including expansion of vocabulary, expansion of stylistic repertoire, and creation of type fonts, allows the language to function in a greater range of circumstances. Meaning to say, first um, we have a particular standard language. So we need to elaborate it more. We need to make it more functional, right, to our community. And next to that is cultivation. So when it comes to cultivation, this is now the establishment of arbiters. So we now have dictionary. These are examples of arbiters, um, or even language academies. Um, what's the value or the purpose of these things? It helps us maintain and advance the status of the language. That's why there are situations that the dictionary would update. They would now include different words coming from other countries, because they know that this must be cultivated and must be disseminated to all, because language is really changing. Then we also have the specific areas of language used. Do these stages affect? So what are being affected? So what are those specific areas, all right, of language use that can be affected? So we have first writing. So the written form of a language may have to be developed, modified, or standardized. If you if we will be crafting our LPP, or making our LPP, we should consider the writing, that it will be modified, it will be changed, or it can be standardized. So that's it. Example is that sometimes um, there's an example that in one particular alphabet, for us, in our case in the Philippines, we have different numbers we have a different number of letters as compared to English alphabet, right? So this is part of the reality, that even though we are adapting, or we are using a different language as our second language, there's always be distinction. There's always be um, differences from this. But still, we should take into consideration that in crafting a language policy, as much as possible, if we can make it be modified and be standardized for easy communication, for its function, then it's a must for us to consider. Then we also have lexicon. So lexicon means to say, the vocabulary of a language may need to expand to keep pace with increasing technological development. So there are a lot of terms coming from other specializations, and of course coming from technology itself. if we will just be observing our young generation with the advancement of the social media that we have, we will notice that they also have their own language. They have their own vocabulary. And with this, we should also put into consideration in crafting our LPP the lexicon. As much as possible, if we can expand, we need to expand our lexicon itself. And also we have syntax. So the syntax of the language may also need to expand as the language takes on a national function. Okay? So Tokpisen, for example, started as a pidgin in Papua New Guinea. However, as Tokpisen became a lingua franca for the New Guinea area, the small vocabulary was restricted, and then even the syntax. And there is now the lack of tense markings, forced unnecessary syntactic development in a former pidgin to accommodate the more widespread use of the language in legal documents and of course in governmental proceedings. So that's an example of syntax. It's okay to expect that syntax will always change and can also be standardized, as I mean, most especially if it will function, or if it will have its national function in our own country. So we also have, all right, so these are the specific areas of language that can be affected by our language planning and policy. So again, when you come up or when you are about to work on a particular LPP or language planning policy, we need to pay attention to the writing, the lexicon, and of course, the syntax. Rules may be changed, especially if we are considering the function. And we also be sure that in crafting out a policy for language, make it more functional. Meaning to say, if you come up with a policy of language, because even in our own school, we all have our own language policy. Because in my experience here in my country, in the institution where I am connected, we follow our own language policy. And with this, we should put into consideration that if you come up with your own language policy, it should be functional. Meaning to say, students can really use this, or they must know the proper way how to make the language that they're learning inside the classroom be more functional outside the university, to make it really a well practiced, and so that the student can find the relevance of the language that we are teaching them or we are requiring them to use inside our institution. And this is now the end of my presentation when it comes to language planning and policy, but focused only in bilingual. So I just used, of course, the first language and then the second language in coming up with our language planning and policy. And I hope that you all learn from my short presentation for tonight's webinar. And again, I am Roma S. Abin from the Philippines. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your rich content presentation, which can impact our knowledge seeker surely. After your presentation, I hope our knowledge seeker can learn something new, which was our main intention. Learn and grow together, IGP knowledge seeker. Once again, thank you so much, dear ma'am, for your presentation. Now, ma'am, it's time for our question answer session, which is the one more valuable part of our regular webinar. Honorable ma'am, please stay with us. After a short video, we will back in our session part 2, which is the question answer part. Dear IGP knowledge seeker, please ask your question in the comment box as much as you want to know from our speaker. Thank you. After question answer, we have a webinar certification and online quiz competition. Dear IGP knowledge seeker, please ask your question in the comment box as much as you want to know from our speaker. Thank you. After question answer, we have a webinar certification and online quiz competition. Welcome back, ma'am. Welcome back to our participant. Dear IGP knowledge seeker, please ask your question in the comment box as much as you want to know from our speaker. Thank you. After question answer, we have a webinar certification and online quiz competition. Dear IGP knowledge seeker, please ask your question in the comment box as much as you want to know from our speaker. Thank you. After question answer, we have a webinar certification and online quiz competition. Dear IGP knowledge seeker, please ask your question in the comment box as much as you want to know from our speaker. Thank you. After question answer, we have a webinar certification and online quiz competition. IGP knowledge seeker, we are waiting for your questions. Please ask your question in the comment box. Ma'am, I think after your wonderful presentation, our participant can understand the topic very clearly. That's why no questions from our participants. So once again, thank you so much, ma'am, for your time in IGP. We have learned a lot from you with new topic. It will add some value to our day-to-day activity along with our academic and professional growth. Honorable ma'am, hope to see you again with new topic and a new day. Thank you, ma'am. Take care.
Thank you also. Thank you for inviting me.
Welcome, ma'am. Ma'am, before we move to the next webinar certification process, if you want to leave this studio, you can, ma'am.
Yes, thank you. Thank you again.
IGP knowledge seeker stand for the webinar certification process, the most attractive part of our regular webinar. After a short video, we will start our webinar certification. After webinar certification, we have an online quiz competition and quiz certification. IGP knowledge seeker stand for the webinar certification process, the most attractive and powerful part of our regular webinar. After a short video, we will start our webinar certification. After webinar certification, we have an online quiz competition and quiz certification. Visit www.eduigp.com. Please make sure your presence on our website. Find a running session and get enrolled. After watching completing part 1 video session, click mark as completed. Move to the next, which is learning test quiz, passing mark 80%. If passed, back to the course again to download your certificate. If fail, you retake the math quiz. Step 6, download your certificate in PDF JPG. For your attention, I am going to share the procedure again. Visit www.eduigp.com. Please make sure your presence on our website. Sign up or sign in. Find a running session and get enrolled. After watching completing part 1, click mark as completed. Move to the next, which is the learning test quiz. Passing mark 80%. If passed, back to the course again to download your certificate. If fail, to retake the quiz. Download your certificate in PDF or JPG. Dear IGP Knowledge Seeker, it's time for the most engaging part of this webinar, which is an online quiz competition, which is a regular webinar activity. We change a free process for online live quiz competition. Note that after live, no one can participate. Now, time for the online quiz competition. To join the online quiz competition properly, please follow my instruction carefully. Now, time for the online quiz competition. To join the online quiz competition properly, please follow my instruction carefully. Visit www.eduigp.com and sign up or sign in. Without this, you cannot join live quiz competition anymore. Browse the live quiz button or given link. Find the session name and join with your log website or user account. Click join and wait for a few minutes for others to join. Enjoy an online quiz, live quiz competition. After the quiz, we will issue certificate for top 10 as previously, which can you find on our website and official Facebook page and group, Institute of Global Professional. After a short video, we will start our quiz session. With 25 people, we are going to start our quiz session right now. Our first question is, why do language planning and policy matter? Option 1, to promote the increase of using only one language. Option 2, to keep language alive, to promote centralized nationalism. Option 2 is the right answer. 75% people are right here. In the leaderboard, Leah is holding the first position. Our next question is, what did we 2010 remind us about language planning and policy LPP? True neutrality of LPP is achievable. Option 2, true neutrality of LPP is impossible. Option 2 is the right answer, and 0% people are right here. The leaderboard, Leah is holding the first position, then we have Jimalian, then we have Christiana, then we have Pepper. Our next question is, which country headed the advice of linguistics before implementing language learning and policy? LPP. Option 1, Singapore. Option 2, Australia. Option 2 is the right answer, and 58% people are right here. In the leaderboard, Kaifar is holding the first position. Our next question is, providing leadership in school development process and curriculum planning and policy formulation is phase 3 practice. Option 1 true, option 2 false. Option 1 true is the right answer, and 3% people are right here. In the leaderboard, Christiana is holding the first position. Our next question is, in one of the primary bases of tourism planning and policy formulation for natural, cultural, and environmental assets. Option 1 tourism paradigm. Option 2 tourism paradigm. Option 2 is the right answer, and 4% people are right here. In the leaderboard, Inilita is holding the first position. Our next question is language of formulation and planning. Option 1, Broca's. Option 2, Warnick's. Option 1 is the right answer, and 33% people are right here. In the leaderboard, Enelita is holding the first position. Our next question is language policy and planning is a neutral social endeavor. Option 1 true, option 2 false. Option 2 is the right answer, and 25% people are right here. In the leaderboard, Charlian is holding the first position. Our next question is what come to mind when you think of language policy and planning? Option 1 power, option 2 who is language, and what are the planning? Option 1 is the right answer, and 36% people are right here. In the leaderboard, Charlian is holding the first position. Our next question is what kind of policy propagates external norms for language education and planning? Option 1 ex-normative, option 2 endonormative. Option 1 is the right answer, and 57% people are right here. In the leaderboard, Charlian is holding the first position. Our last and final question of the evening session is talking about language policy and planning in Ireland. What is not an affirmation? Option 1 Irish language as the first official language. Option 2 Irish as a second language. Option 2 is the right answer, and 45% people are right here. So, congratulations to our online quiz competition winner top 10. Congratulations again. We will take a few minutes for finalizing the result, and after that, we will issue our online quiz competence certificate on our official Facebook page and group Institute of Global Professional. Congratulations to our online quiz competition winner top 10. Congratulations again. We will take a few minutes for finalizing the result, and after that, we will issue our online quiz competence certificate on our official Facebook page and group Institute of Global Professional. Congratulations to our online quiz competition winner top 10. Congratulations again. We will take a few minutes for finalizing the result, and after that, we will issue our online quiz competence certificate on our official Facebook page and group Institute of Global Professional. At the end of our session, we can say properly feed your skill, never stop learning, cause life never stop teaching us. Be happy and stay safe. See you again and again. We want your participation in every program. If you want to live a happy life, try to a goal, not to people or things. Albert Einstein. Before I say or hit the end like button one again, thank you so much for your active participation as always. See you again in the next session. Thank you.